Welcome to another edition of the Supplies on Demand product feature video blog. You can find the written version of the blog at www.suppliesondemand.blogspot.com and our online store at www.suppliesondemand.biz. Today we're using two different colors of Rub and Buff, Jade and Antique Gold, to decorate this small cardboard box. I'm going to use some stencils to add an image to the top of the box using Rub and Buff, and then I'll use the scallop pattern Fiskars paper edger to make a border stencil for around the edge of the lid. When we're done, we'll have a great looking finished product that can be used as a gift box, for decoration, or as a small jewelry box. The first step is to lay down our base colors. I'm going to paint the lid of the box Jade, and then the box itself Antique Gold. I'm using a brush this time because I want to make sure I get a nice even coat. So let's clear everything out of the way. Start with the lid. I'll give the Jade Rub and Buff a nice good shake, and then put a small amount directly on the lid. Now when I did this with the wood, I used a very small amount, and you'll find with cardboard and other paper products you need even less. Rub and Buff spreads on it very nice and easily, especially if you're using a brush as opposed to your fingers, because you're going to have a lot less waste. So as you can see, it's spreading nice and evenly across the top of this box, and I might have even put a little bit too much on the brush. We'll do a time lapse here so that you can see the finished lid once I'm done with it. So there's our finished lid, covered with the jade. I'm going to set this over to the side, let it dry a little bit, and then we're going to move on to the actual box itself, which we're going to cover in Antique Gold. Chose Antique Gold because it's a little subtler, it's a little less shiny than some of the other golds, and I didn't want it to overpower the jade with the box here. So we're going to give that a shake, and then put some, again, right on the box. And then start spreading that around with our paintbrush. And again, we'll put another time lapse in here so you can see what this looks like when I'm all done with it. So there's the base of the box, fully coated in the Antique Gold. As you can see, it's really nice and shiny. Got a nice gloss to it. Looks really nice against the jade. So we're going to let these sit for a little while, let them dry for about an hour or two. Then we're going to come back and stencil on some different patterns onto the lid, and maybe onto the box itself, and then we'll be done. We'll have a nice little gift box. Here's the fully painted box. I let it dry for a little over an hour, and then I buffed it with a dry cloth. You can see photos of the box before and after buffing on the blog. Next, I'm going to add some stenciling to the green lid with the gold paint. Using a plastic stencil on top, swirl pattern, I'm going to put a line of 3 on the lid. The outside of the tool will be partial stencils. Now I tested out the stencils earlier with both a brush and a tissue. Found that when you used a brush it tended to bleed under the edge and give you a not very clear stencil, so I'm going to try this using a tissue. For those of you out there who are a little more experienced with using stencils, you'll have your own particular way of doing this, I'm sure. But I'm just going to go ahead and use the tissue because that's what I'm more comfortable with. So we'll take a little bit of the Antique Gold. I'm going to put it directly on the tissue rather than on the stencil. And then we're just going to try and hold this down there as tightly as possible onto the lid, and do this quickly so that we don't get too much bleeding, that we get a nice sharp image. We'll take the stencil off, and there, hopefully you can see that on the video, we've got a nice little stencil across the top of the box. So we'll let that dry, and then we'll buff it, and then we're going to come back and we're going to add the scallop edge pattern around the edge of the lid. So here's our lid with the finished stencil pattern on top of it. Again, just use some Antique Gold Rub and Buff and a plastic stencil. Stencil the swirl pattern on there, let it dry, and then buffed it with a dry cloth, just like the Rub and Buff on the lid and the rest of the box. You can see pictures on the blog of the stencil before and after buffing. So our next step is we're going to add a scallop border to the bottom of the lid here. Took our scallop pattern Fiskars paper edger, cut a strip of regular white copy paper, taped it around the edge here, and then again we're going to take a tissue and just dab some Antique Gold Rub and Buff around the edge here. Hopefully we get a nice pattern out of it. And again, we'll probably take a little time-lapse break here, bring you back in once we have this edge all done. So there's our finished box. Went ahead and buffed up the edge of it during the break there. I think it turned out pretty well. So once again, made this by using the jade and antique gold rub and buff, as well as the scallop pattern Fiskars paper edger. This is Dan, blogging for www.suppliesondemand.blogspot.com, and you can find our online store at www.suppliesondemand.biz.